wanted to discuss this one on stream and get feedback because before I post it, because I don't think Kieran will like this reply. So I wanted to see if anyone else has any suggestions. For the reasons I explained in the reply, I don't think I can just avoid it and not say it and ignore the issue. But I also think he doesn't want to talk about it. I think that that is an error by him that's sabotaging discussion in a way that's really hard to deal with. I don't want to get into saying we're at an impasse because he's irrational and his approach to discussion is incapable of reaching the truth and resolving disagreements. But that's kind of the situation. Similarly, he seems to be being dishonest to avoid admitting fault. He doesn't want to get backed into a corner and caught out as being wrong, even though he's wrong. So he's making it totally ambiguous about whether he was wrong, whether he changed his mind, whether he knew all along that the thing he said was false, as written, etc. He has tried to vaguely imply it was my fault because he said, oh, well, I was talking about CLT, and that is supposed to bring with it all of the qualifications and exceptions that he had denied by saying irrespective of the distribution. But then I couldn't even get the qualification out of him when I repeatedly asked if CLT had exceptions. Also, what I thought happened was he said, I'm talking about CLT, so I thought he meant CLT, says or implies the stuff I just said. I thought CLT was like the source of the rigorous arguments to reach the conclusion he had just stated, rather than CLT is the source of the rigorous arguments to reach a different conclusion that is not the one he actually said. Like, what he seems to think that he was modifying his conclusion, or modifying his statement without ever saying that he was taking it back and replacing it with a different one. I think he just doesn't want to be honest and open about what he changes his mind about, what he retracts. He doesn't want to be caught out in error. Really standard stuff. And also, he doesn't want to take responsibility for what he said. He says, like, it was just a parenthetical, it wasn't my main point. So, why say it if it doesn't matter? And if it's worth saying, then it's worth getting right. You should take responsibility for every statement you say, and if you're not going to do that, you should say, I'm a beginner who is not capable of managing what I say so that it's true and I can actually care about it or pay attention to it. Like, it's all just a chaotic mess I can't keep control over. Like, either, on the one hand, you're a responsible person who is competent to discuss, and you actually choose every single one of your statements intentionally and you'll take responsibility for them, or not, in which case, like, what is a discussion partner to do with you if you can't take responsibility for everything you're saying? If just some of it mixed in, you don't think you're responsible for, it's just this random chaos that doesn't have much to do with your thinking. Like, if you're just mixing that in, how's someone supposed to discuss with you? They could maybe help you if you're trying to learn. They could give you advice and stuff, but you're not actually going to be able to debate on those terms. I think part of what he's doing is just throwing every argument he can at me. He throws arguments only for the one side. Like, he's not looking for what are the best reasonings for both sides. He just wants his side. And then he tries to throw every argument he can to win, to help his side, to score points for his side. And if some of them work, he's like, okay, well, I didn't score points that time. Let's move on to my other argument that I think will score more points. Which is a terrible type of person to discuss with, because they're just throwing a bunch of bad arguments at you, and if you refute them, they just try other bad arguments. And the only way to win is by throwing arguments at them. It's like whoever gets the initiative and gets to attack the most is the only person who can score points, because you only get points on offense, not defense. And that's a really broken system with really bad incentives. I don't know, people are really hard to talk with or help. It's very hard to go through the other stuff he said while this is outstanding. Like, I could go through it, and then I could make some comments, and he might like them, and be like, that was interesting, I'm glad we're having this discussion. However, it wouldn't resolve anything. We'd then have just a million open issues, as we already do, and we'd still be unable to resolve any of them. And he would still be unable to teach me anything or correct me on anything. Like, I'd just be going through, and the parts where he says I'm wrong, he'd be wrong, like in this particular case. But he seems to just not have the skill or knowledge to correct me on anything, and also not know how to discuss effectively, and also not want to take on a learner role. So I could give him a bunch of like free tips and whatever by going through all the stuff he said that I haven't read yet. But I already did a bunch of that, and he's not making it very rewarding. Like, what is the incentive for me to take a person who's not competent to debate with me and then tell them a bunch of their mistakes when they're learning, generally not learning from their mistakes being pointed out much? Like, I can say a bunch of stuff that's interesting to him. I have things to say, but he doesn't actually have much to say to me. It's just like a series of him being wrong and then me giving him info. Like, I've already done a bunch of that because there are various reasons. Like, I give people a chance. It's interesting to talk to a new person, but now I have a handle on who and what he is. So some of my motivations for just explaining a bunch of stuff to him have gone away. Like, there are major signs that he's never going to be my peer, my assistant, my colleague. He's never going to learn FI. He's never going to be very honest. Like, there are major indications of those things. And once you see those sort of problems, then what's the incentive to try to teach a person who doesn't want to be taught, or debate with a person who doesn't know how to have a debate and doesn't want to talk about methods of having a debate? Like, when someone has the wrong methods for a discussion and they don't want to talk about methods, like, then what? You can just sort of ignore most of the problems, and then say stuff. But when you're both basically ignoring most of what's going wrong and then saying stuff, then the value that happens is largely based on your pre-existing knowledge. If you have a bunch of prior knowledge of interesting things to say, you can just say them like basically out of context, regardless of what's happening in the discussion. Even if the discussion is a mess, you can just monologue some interesting knowledge on the topic, and the other person might see some value in that. But Kieran doesn't have a bunch of interesting knowledge on the topic that is informative to me. Like, I can just talk for hours on stream and say interesting things, and I can do that for Kieran personally on topics of his choice, and then he can like it in a similar way to podcast listeners liking listening to me talk. That's a different thing than a discussion. Like, if he won't discuss rationally and he won't discuss rational discussion methods, it can be less like a discussion. But at that point, I'm just talking a bunch, and he listens, and maybe he learns something, and the whole part where it looks like a discussion is actually just a fraud. And I think he won't want to admit or say that or see it that way either. He doesn't want to be like a fan in the audience. He wants it to actually be a discussion. But he won't discuss discussion itself, how to discuss, what constitutes an effective discussion, what are the goals of discussion, etc., etc. He just wants to assume that he's already like a competent discusser. That's the implicit assumption. And then act accordingly. And then after it doesn't work, and that has caused, dozens of problems in the discussion so far. But he doesn't acknowledge any of them. He can't resolve any of them and see them and get them fixed because his discussion methods are not effective for being corrected. So it's an impasse. He also disappeared for weeks with no explanation, and I won't be surprised if at any time he disappears forever with no explanation. And I think like even this thing I've just written is risky, that he won't like it and will just plain leave and will never resolve anything. And I think that that's a bad context to be trying to explain much to someone in. Having like no clear and reliable information about their actual intentions and how they'll behave in the future and whether the discussion will actually continue much if or not. Like, that kind of unreliable, chaotic meta context to the discussion makes it harder and worse. It means that every single thing I say has to be like self-contained and benefiting me immediately in the short term, because I can't do any kind of long-term planning unless I'm willing to take like a risk. Like, I know there's a 50% chance that he'll leave before this long-term plan happens. So the value proposition has to be double what it would normally be to make up for a 50% chance of no value. the math gets a lot harder due to the unpredictability of what he will do. And I think that's the kind of thing he's also unwilling to talk about or address. He doesn't want to say his plans or commit himself to anything. He doesn't want to, stake his reputation on anything. He doesn't want to discuss his motivations and personality. He doesn't want to discuss his life, his schedule, what he's busy with. He wants the discussion to be very limited and bounded. Like, that's the theme here, is limit the discussion to certain topics, in particular this induction stuff, but not, say, the consequences and impact of the mistakes he made while discussing the induction stuff. That's too off topic for him. He doesn't like that discussion, let alone talking about what he does with his life and why, and what role this conversation plays in his life, and what he hopes to gain from it, and what he wants in the future. Would he be interested in becoming an actual good philosopher and doing the work to do that? And what would it take to convince him that certain books and discussion forums and whatever are part of that? Another issue, which I have not brought up, and he'd probably just dislike it if I brought up, but it's highly relevant, is does he have money and would he pay for help? Does he actually value this enough to pay anything? And there's sort of three situations there, like claims to value it but not have enough money to pay, or claims this is an equal discussion and I value it, but you're getting value too, so I shouldn't pay, or willing to pay, or just will not claim to value it for more than a couple dollars or whatever. A lot of people put very low dollar numbers on discussions and ideas and knowledge. Literally written like 50 comments to him, something in that ballpark, maybe more. So from my perspective, that's easily, just without even thinking about it, well in excess of a $10,000 investment in the sort of effort I've put into the discussion and what that's worth. And I suspect that he values that at closer to $10 than $10,000. And there's a huge perspective gap there where he doesn't actually appreciate or value me anywhere close to what I think my value is. And I think that's another thing he wouldn't want to discuss. And that's also relevant to whether he will leave or whatever, because if he actually valued it, he wouldn't want to leave. I suspect he doesn't, but I also suspect he doesn't want to. But if he values it at $10, he's wasting my time. And I think he won't want to admit that he's wasting my time by asking for a bunch of help and responses that he values near zero. I also think that even if he said he values it at, say, $10, or he'd only be willing to pay $50 or whatever, low number, even if he said all that, that doesn't actually mean that he values it that low. People are really bad at money and figuring out pricing and stuff. So it could be, misconceptions about money can be mixed up in how much he claims to value it when the value is converted to money. But it's hard to put the value in other terms. You can see, though, that he has spent a lot of time on it. Even if he only values his time at, say, $10 an hour, he's probably spent at least 30 hours on the discussion, so at least $300 of how much time he was willing to put in. And it could easily be, far more than that, both for hours and also how much he values his own time, or reasonably ought to if he was better at understanding money, on the possibility that he doesn't understand money. Just because most people don't. I haven't talked to him about money at all. Well, the issue wasn't how to value my time and happiness and whatever. It was, it was actually about how to value my comments to him, the things he got to read, which he wanted and went out of his way to get from me, and chose to spend time on and whatever. But I think his willingness to actually pay money for them is probably near zero. And I think he wouldn't want to talk about why that is, and whether he has a good excuse, or whether he just thinks near zero is the right amount, or what. People also get really fucking mad if you discuss whether they're your peer or not, whether they're your equal, whether you're discussing, in an even-handed way where they're actually keeping up with you, or if it's a totally different type of interaction, where they're lost and their skill level is just so far below that they're making a constant stream of mistakes. Like for everything they say, I can see 3 mistakes because I know so much more than them. I'm so much more skilled that they're just making a constant, huge amount of mistakes I wouldn't make. And people don't want to acknowledge that's the situation or think about how to deal with it or what to do, given that that's the context. That came up with Fallible Cat on Discord the other day. I think one of the things that really offended him was when I said something about him not actually being an equal in terms of like skill and knowledge. But like, his comments just repeatedly were not on my level, were nothing like what I would say, were full of errors I could see. And there was like a lack of seriousness and stuff in his comments too. And he wasn't really in any serious way trying to do what I do. But people really hate putting in perspective that kind of situation and where they're at. Not everyone, like Ming Mecca, has a much better attitude where he's said some things like he finally found someone really great and he's happy to find someone who's really good who he could actually learn some things from, because most people are like below him. Most people, and I think Kieran is also not. Kieran is to some extent like acting a bit like that, but he also doesn't. He also keeps arguing stuff like he thinks he's actually going to win the argument, and I think he would not acknowledge the situation. When I met David Deutsch, I did acknowledge the situation. I was like, I'm losing all the arguments. This is wonderful. He knows way more than me. He's more skilled than me, etc. Even when it looks to me like he made a mistake, my expectation was once I argue my point, I will end up at some point losing the debate and changing my mind. I didn't expect to actually win when I thought I saw an error. I figured I'm probably missing something. So I had that attitude for many years. But most people never want to have that attitude. And it's not just that they can't find anyone to have it with, it's that they actually don't want to have it. Like they're not looking for the opportunity to have that attitude. They don't want it. Whereas like I'd be happy to have more of it. If I could find someone who knew a lot more than me and I was constantly losing arguments, that would be wonderful. But like most people are like basically beginners and also don't want that. And so they stay beginners. Most people, they also don't respect themselves, like their ability to actually be an important thinker who has any accomplishments ever. They're not really expecting that, even if they won't say it that way. Like they're not like, the world has a bunch of problems, I'm smart, it's urgent to improve things, I can do this, I can learn what's going on and learn enough that I can actually contribute things. It's not just for the experts, the academics, the professors or whatever, but like thinking that you can do something. Most people, they won't say they can't do anything important, but then they act like it, and they seem to have that assumption that they're just not a genius. Ming Mecca does not have that perspective that he's not a genius, he doesn't matter, he'll never matter, so that's nice. Kyle as well, from the FI Discord recently, does not have that perspective. Like, he keeps saying things like, he doesn't know a lot now, but he's planning to improve, he has goals, he has aspirations, he thinks he can get better and learn a bunch of philosophy knowledge and it'll be really useful, and then he will do something good in his life. Like, that seems to be his attitude, and that's really nice to see. Both the like some level of humility and honesty that he doesn't have all the answers yet, and also some goals, some thinking big where he could actually get good at this stuff in the future. Whereas with most people like Kat and Kieran, you really don't see either of those. They're not humble now, and also they don't actually act like they think they could ever matter or be good. It's like, that's actually a weird combo. Like, on the one hand, they think they're already good, and on the other hand, they act like they don't matter and they'll never be good. And there are contexts where they like admit that there are a lot of people that will admit that they're far below like Sam Harris or Jordan Peterson or Steven Pinker or Richard Dawkins or David Deutsch. But the same people will not admit to being way below me, even though I have published criticism of some of those people that has been answered or refuted by no one. And I've been For many years, David Deutsch's primary discussion partner, his peer, his equal. And so if they are below David Deutsch, why can they not admit to being below David's like #1 colleague? But they don't want to acknowledge that I ever was that. They won't deny it, but they won't, think about it either. And I mean, you can see what's going on here. It's social status. They're comfortable admitting to being below someone with high social status, but to a major approximation, if they're having a conversation with you, if they actually get to talk to you, then they think you're equals. And they only respect people who won't talk to them. Sam Harris is not available to them, so they think that is proof of how great he is, that he's above them, that he talks to better people than them. There's a lot of fucked up stuff with those perspectives there. I thought it was a basic point, but okay. I don't know. Like, it seems weird to me that other people wouldn't know that, but maybe it's a good point. Also, I guess it depends which point you mean. When I said I thought it was basic, I meant that, like, the thing that sets Sam Harris apart and why they're willing to, like, be below him is that he's high social status. But then there's the point of, the point I said later, that if they can talk to you, they think that means you're equals, like you're not above them. Because those high social status people won't talk to them at all. That's like a lesser known point that seems like more notable to me. So I had sort of two separate points about social status. The social status thing was also huge with Dennis, by the way. He was very respectful at first. He was sort of like, oh, this is a peer of David who does consulting, and then I did consulting with him, and he had great things to say about AI, and Dennis was like very impressed, and he was very like respectful of my time, and there were a lot of like signs that he was treating me in a respectful way, which is what people normally do with people they see as higher social status than they are. He thought he was talking up to someone above him, and he acted accordingly, and he's perfectly capable of acting that way. And then when he got more familiar, when I let him join a private chat room and he talked with people more, familiarity breeds contempt. He stopped seeing people who were willing to talk to him as being above him, and he started feeling socially like an equal or peer. Not intellectually, but socially is the actual issue. And then once he felt socially like an equal, he stopped being respectful, and his own way of discussing got a lot worse and stopped being effective, and actually he started sabotaging everything. Like, his mode of dealing with someone above him was better, it was more effective. He was perfectly capable of doing that, he was just unwilling to do it once he didn't feel lower social status anymore. Like, in order to deal with him, the thing that would have most helped our interactions and prevented him from quitting was don't be nice to him, don't be friendly, be cold and distant, and maintain higher social status. That is the thing that would have prevented him from ending up disliking me and kept us on terms where he could deal with me in a way that worked well for him. Which is fucking ridiculous. When the reason I invited him and was more friendly with him is because he was doing month after month for multiple months, like 4 or something, just very little involvement with FI, very little time or effort put into learning anything. So it's like the minimal interactions we had were actually effective then. However, there were very few of them, and he just wouldn't do much to learn Popper, learn CR, learn yes, no. Like, he never actually did much. And so I tried to get him more involved, and then the result was he did talk a bit more, but then he felt like, oh, we're just buddies. And then he stopped being respectful and started causing a bunch of problems. Like shooting himself in the foot because he changed his interaction mode. Anyway, I really dislike managing social status or dealing with people's like social climbing shit. So I didn't, but then everything blew up. People do perceive me as arrogant. In particular, arrogant means acting like you're higher social status than you are. That is the type of arrogance people care about. People have social metaphysics. Social stuff is the primary thing they think about. So you might assume arrogance means thinking you're smarter than you are, and people will say that's what they mean by arrogance, but the actual thing they react to and care about is thinking you're higher social status than you are, acting like you're high status when you're low status. It's social arrogance that is what people actually care about and notice. By the way, the familiarity stuff, people change way too abruptly. Like, even if you should change, it should be like a gradual thing as you gradually get to know people better and start taking more liberties and acting more familiar and stuff. It should be slow changes over time. But they commonly will do it in just like a few weeks. They will totally change. With Dennis, it only took a few long conversations that he didn't pay for, and then he thought we were buddies and we're etc. etc. And he was so fucking at home in my chat room that he thought he should be able to say whatever he wants there, and if I criticize it, I'm like picking fights rather than he should stop posting political stuff we disagree with if he's not willing to debate it. He thought, it's totally legitimate for him to just post whatever material with no regard for what type of forum it is because he's like a valid full member or whatever. That's what he thought after like a couple weeks. It was a very short time that he went from like careful, cautious to like aggressive and how dare you question my right to do this kind of total 180. This is kind of confusing, but I think he means that the next paragraph of the post is the full summary. But he doesn't label this as the summary. He doesn't say when he'll do it or where he'll do it. He doesn't label when the summary starts or ends. So he's doing clarity poorly, which shows to me some lack of understanding of the clarity article. He also wrote a URL with a period directly next to it that is not part of the URL. If you put this in your browser, you will in fact get an error and it won't load. This is another clarity error where he failed to do the URL correctly. Mail has ignored his error and fixed it for him in an automated way, but he did it wrong. His URL is broken. He made it unclear whether the period is supposed to be part of the URL or not. He's not paying attention to detail. He's not doing a good job. And this is in a context where he should be on high alert because there was ongoing confusion, miscommunication, etc. in this discussion already. And so then, as the article explains, when things are going wrong like that, or just on the general assumption that things are going wrong in your life if you're normal, you should be like extra careful, and he's not doing that. Like, he could do better than this if he actually had any idea how to pay attention to being clearer. Now, it's true that the article doesn't teach you all the details of what to do, but if you understand the abstract concepts in the article, the principles, the concepts, you should be able to figure out some specific details yourself. You should be able to come up with examples and apply them in some ways. And this is like the kind of thing that maybe you could come up with yourself without being specifically told, if you actually understood the article. So there should be a comma here after this. This like mini sentence here, or no, this is a fragment. So yeah, like there's grammar error, sentence fragment. If you're actually doing your best to try to write clearly, would you write a sentence fragment? Why would you write a sentence fragment? This fragment relies on implied words. He could say the words instead of implying them if he was trying to do his best to be clear, which he isn't. So you can see from his email that he doesn't understand the issue, and I haven't even read the summary yet. Right, misunderstandings are usually caused by the usage of references. Okay, so this sentence is incorrect. This is not what the article says. This is not something I believe. This is false. Use of references is a common cause of misunderstandings. That doesn't mean they are usually caused by it. When you say they're usually caused by it, that means something like 70% of all misunderstandings are caused by use of references. But that's not true. They're definitely, in my opinion, less than 50%. I would say less than 20% even. Even if use of references is the #1 cause of misunderstandings, which I don't know if it is or not, but I'll say it's a major cause. Even if it's the #1 cause, I would still think that it's less than 20% of misunderstandings overall, because there are many, many causes of misunderstandings. So this is false. Oh, I guess we should actually look at the article. What does the article say about references? Ref. It says a big causes. It does not say usually. So this references should be avoided. He's grammaring wrong. Now that doesn't show a misunderstanding of the article, but it is wrong. Especially when some misunderstanding is taking place. If that's actually his best effort, he really ought to learn English. Like, I understand people who make a lot of mistakes because they're foreigners, but you would think that his best effort would be better. Like, if he actually double and triple checked things and looked things up in a dictionary, I'd hope that he could avoid some of these English mistakes while putting in like a major effort. So if you look up ER and EST endings, it says they are for adjectives. This is the info I was specifically trying to get, because I think clearest is an adjective, but he used it as an adverb where he needed clearly. So just basic looking up of stuff would clarify that he's doing it wrong, I think. I mean, it would certainly give an initial indication that it might be wrong, because from the first website I went to, it appears that those things are adjectives. So he shouldn't be using one to apply to a verb. But the reason there's a the in front of an adjective is because there's an implied word. Clearest needs a noun after it, like write the clearest writing. There's an implied writing here. It means something like that, but it's still super awkward and kind of wrong. But the way he actually wrote it without that implied word, it looks like it's supposed to be an adverb, and I think it's basically intended to be an adverb. Do not let any minor misunderstandings without clarification. I don't think that's what he wants to hear. He was quite hostile months ago, before disappearing for months, to the idea that he is a beginner who needs to learn a bunch of stuff, and he's basically incompetent and doesn't understand what he reads very well, and doesn't know what he's talking about. He didn't like that messaging. He did not want to start a learning project. He wanted to debate me. That's my general recollection. I think there's not a lot of value to lose here. Like, it's not that important to optimize. It would be nice if he took it well or discussed productively or whatever, but it's hard to make that happen. I can't really expect it. So I shouldn't put a bunch of work into trying to get that outcome that I think is not accessible, both due to his unwillingness and also his just lack of a bunch of valuable knowledge to offer. And then there's all the barriers he's putting in the way. I work on the barriers not primarily because of the other person, like caring about that particular person. It's because I'm interested in the problem in general of the barriers people put up, like having bad discussion methods plus being unwilling to discuss discussion methods. They have discussion methods that, one, are bad for discussion directly, and two, also prohibit or ruin discussion of discussion methods. So they screw up the main topic and the means of correcting errors. And that's where impasses come from. It's the dual feature, the double header of one causing some sort of problem or error or whatever, which is basically inevitable. Like, you can't be perfect. There are going to be errors. So part one is ever present. And then part two of how to create an impasse is to screw up the means of correcting errors. So you get error plus no error correction equal impasse. And error is everywhere. So whenever you don't have error correction, you're always going to get impasses. And whenever you have error correction, you will never have impasses. And you'll then be at the beginning of infinity. It's error correction makes the difference between bounded and unbounded life, thinking, ideas, progress, everything. And so what Kieran is offering is an example, an interactive example, partially interactive. He's not that great at answering questions or giving the information I try to get from him, but he's somewhat interactive. Example of an impasse. However, it's an awkward example because the impasse is, from his perspective, a tangent or side issue that he doesn't want to talk or think about. It's not the thing he's trying to discuss. The thing he's trying to discuss is induction, and the impasse is discussion methods that he The impasse is that he won't change topics, that he's putting bounds on the discussion to prevent errors from being corrected. And the errors are not his errors about induction. He's making errors about induction, but those aren't the problem. Those aren't causing an impasse by themselves. The impasse comes from his discussion method errors that he doesn't want to discuss. So he's not intentionally like using a discussion methodology that's just there automatically, unavoidably, but he doesn't take seriously that it's there, that it's important, that it's a major part of the discussion. He thinks the major part of the discussion is whatever he says about induction, but whenever he says that, he's also using discussion methods. Every single post he has involves his discussion method knowledge. He's only open to error correction about induction, but not about the discussion method aspect of his posts. And the discussion method aspect governs the ability to correct his errors about induction. It's in charge. It's the more important, more central thing. I mean, she's just sort of talking about life, and it has nothing to do with the philosophy she's talking about. Like, she's mixing up her sort of practical advice that you should try to understand why you want to eat instead of doing shit mindlessly, which is reasonable and good. And she's trying to mix that up with this abstract philosophy stuff, which isn't helping. She wants to connect like her practical knowledge, which is in this case and in some other cases too reasonably okay, with her abstract conceptual knowledge, which is a mess, and the connections I think are even worse. Like either one on its own is sort of okay, but then her way of putting the two together is worse than either one on its own. This is a common problem people have, where they can deal with some concretes and they can deal with some abstract stuff, but they can't deal with like medium stuff that involves both concretes and abstracts together. And that's where they do the worst. Like they can deal with reality somewhat, and when you take reality totally out of it, and it's just a pure like toy example, they do okay when they're not trying to apply the concepts to reality. They have sort of both parts separately, but they can't actually make their way of dealing with reality be based on or related to their conceptual understanding. They like learn a bunch of concepts, which they do in an ivory tower way. They can talk about them when they're sitting in their armchair, but it doesn't have much to do with their life. And here Kate is trying to connect the two things, which is, I guess, is a good thing to do in general. Like, people should be connecting them. The problem is just that she's doing it really badly and making a mess. She still uses italics really badly. I think she would do better if she just didn't use italics. I think that would be an improvement. I think she should actually do that on purpose. Like, just go for 3 months with no italics. And so whatever you wanted to communicate with italics, you now have to communicate with words. And practice that and learn to use words more. And I think that would help her some. Because she uses italics when she's not explaining something well enough. And somehow she thinks that the italics will solve the problem, that she was unable to communicate what she meant. But they do not solve it, and she just, every time she writes italics, there is something she's not communicating. They're a sign that her writing is broken. That's quite a tangent. I don't think those are directly related. But yes, she should make videos. I've told everyone that everyone should make videos of their post-writing process. I have said this for years. Justin started doing some of it recently. Everyone else is still ignoring me. With no counter arguments, no explanations of why it's a bad idea, no dissent, no concerns. They just won't do it. They won't talk about why they won't do it. They won't say I'm wrong, but they also won't do it. So it's just an impasse. Very standard impasse. No error correction. There are similar things with other issues too. You know, it's a typical way people are, is I give advice and they make an impasse. So Kate seems to be confusing, 1, putting X into English, and 2, putting the cause of X into English. It's true that if you put the cause of X into English, you can't separate that from investigating causes. But what I was talking about is putting X into English is separate than investigating the cause of X. I think Kate is lost, and her lack of skill at logic is playing a major role in making this discussion harder. I have recommended to people that they study logic and discuss that study, very similar to the grammar learning project, but no one has done it. See here, she says if you're investigating a cause. Oh, wait. And you identify it. Yeah, she's totally lost. She's mixing things like her understanding of human psychology. For many people, the underlying cause of the desire to post is to get approval and reassurance. This is like practical, life-related knowledge that's reasonably accurate. Like there's some decent content to it. And it is disconnected from the logical theory points she's also trying to talk about at the same time. She's mixing the two together, but she's not connecting them well. She just says one and then says the other, and they don't really go together.